Welcome to In Touch with Durham County. I'm Deborah Craig-Bray, General Manager of Strategic Planning and Innovation, Public Affairs and Special Projects. I'm joined by my co-host, County Commission Chairman Michael Page.
Hello, Deborah. As our regular viewers know, we use this TV show to interview our Durham County department heads, staff, and community partners to share important information about the many valuable programs and services.
Today, it's our pleasure to be joined by County Manager Wendell Davis and Dionne Hines, Assistant to the County Manager. We'll hear an update about the My Brother's Keeper program here in Durham. Chairman Page, let's begin our conversation.
Let's begin. Welcome, Mr. Davis, and welcome, Ms. Hines. Thank you both for being with us today. If you would take some time and share with us some background with our viewers who may not know about the My Brother's Keeper national initiative that we have kicked off in 2014.
Absolutely. And first of all, I hope you guys had a good Thanksgiving holiday, and I'm delighted that we can come forth today and share with you some of the ongoing work in this important community initiative, My Brother's Keeper. Let me just say, back in March of 2014, the Board of County Commissioners, along with the City Council, agreed that they would take on two major community initiatives. The first one, of course, being the Mayor's Poverty Initiative, which is going on in East Durham. But in addition to that, we wanted to have a major youth initiative in our community in light of a number of the challenges and disparities that we were, in fact, confronted with. And so the Board of County Commissioners took on the My Brother's Keeper initiative, which was essentially launched out of President Obama's White House initiative, and subsequently for the last 2 years we've been working real hard in that space in order to try and recognize better youth outcomes, specifically around boys and men of color in light of many of the disparities. Great.
On that same note, what are some of the policies and practices that have caused these issues to exist?
So obviously, Chairman Page, I don't have to spend a whole lot of time talking, specifically about, health disparities or the academic achievement gap or over-incarceration or, quite frankly, what our poverty situation is. I think that many of us know and understand what those challenges are. So what we have done as a part of this work and as a part of the requirements that the President brought forward was essentially going through a extensive one-year policy review to look at things that had specific impacts on young people in our community. And as such, while I talked about all of those respective disparities in education and health and over-incarceration or our court system, some of the recommendations that came as a result of some of the policy work that we did was to look at how we could subsequently revise our comprehensive health education curriculum, for example, in our public education school system, to address those harmful male norms or social norms that, quite frankly, would have an impact on their emotional competence. And so we had to drill down specifically in areas like that, and that's just essentially one example under the health recommendation. But when you look at what is happening in our country right now, particularly around the splintered relationships between community and police relationships, some of the policy recommendations that came forth as a result of that was looking at how we could make sure that those who were in fact on the front lines could indeed be engaged in things like our implicit racial bias training and racial equity training and things of that nature in order to make sure that we got to a very different place. We will talk a little bit later about, the work that's going on around our universal pre-K program, but just from a policy standpoint, there were a considerable number of young people in our community, obviously, that do not have access to universal pre-K. And so one of the recommendations from a policy perspective is making sure that we get more young people and boys and men of color, children of color, should I say, engaged in that space around universal pre-K. Because the notion is, of course, if these young folks are able to read on grade level and do math on grade level by the time they are in third grade, the idea is that by the time they reach 5th, 6th, 8th, 9th, 10th grade, they could remain, in fact, on grade level. And so those are some of the kinds of critical policy implications for the policy review work that's gone on for a year. And I just want to thank you for your commitment in respect to helping us in that space, because I remember, the trip that you and I took back to the White House to learn specifically what was going on across the nation in this space.
Great, yes.
So would you mind discussing the need to build human capital?
Well, so Deborah, I think that it's one of the most important things that that we can, quite frankly, do. I bought, I guess, what you might call a prompt today, and it's essentially this piece of work, The New Geography of Jobs by Enrico Moretti. And what Enrico Moretti talks about essentially in this book is basically this. He said throughout the country there are 4 innovation hubs: San Diego, San Jose, Boston, Massachusetts, and of course right here where we're sitting. Now, from the perspective of human capital, if we are going to have a sustainable model and we're going to make sure that we have good pathways for young people to be educated and to take advantage of the job opportunities, be they high tech, be they in medicine or what have you, we want to make sure that we are getting and giving our young people a good fighting chance in respect to taking advantage of those opportunities. So making these investments in human capital, these critical social investments in human capital means that from a competitive and a comparative economic advantage, it puts us in the best light. And so it's extremely important that we make these investments, because it effectively means over the long haul the survivability, of our community.
Now, precisely why did the Durham County Commissioners, and of course Chairman Page was really a leader in that space, why was that an important thing for Durham County to join?
Well, I think it was important, quite frankly, because, when you think about the MBK Initiative, I talked about the various disparities earlier around educational achievement, around, the disparities that we see in terms of healthcare and poverty, and all of those areas. What the president essentially gave us was 6 critical factors or points that we needed to accept as a result of accepting this challenge. We wanted to make sure that all children enter school cognitively, physically, socially, and emotionally ready. We want to make sure that all of those children can read at grade level, as I said earlier, by 3rd grade. We wanted to ensure that they graduate from high school. We want to make certain that they complete a post-secondary education or training, and to ensure that all of those youth can, in fact, be employed. And last and most importantly, that they remain safe from violent crime and are afforded a second chance in the event that, they do, in fact, get off course. And so, that's essentially been the drive. And as I said, Durham is faced with similar challenges as other communities across the country. And from the perspective of human capital, I talked on several shows back about what our challenge was globally in terms of being able to compete. And I think, a solid foundation in education and making sure that we build on the educational competence and make sure that folks, are in a good place as far as, their health is concerned, and that we've got a good engagement strategy with our courts to make sure that, certain things are in fact addressed, then, I think, it puts us on the right track.
What is the local youth services context that MBK Durham currently exists within now?
So, Chairman Page, there is a lot to talk about in this space, and Dionne and I will subsequently tag team on this. But let me just say that what we have is very much so what I describe in Durham as a multifaceted approach in respect to trying to address these issues associated with these young boys and men of color. And so the first thing that I will do is to talk in respect to some things that are happening at the leadership level in our community. We believe that, and when I say we, I'm talking about the city manager, myself, that the basic foundation of getting many of these social and economic challenges on the table has to do with making sure that we have the appropriate framework in place for racial and cultural understanding. And so one of the things that we have invested in over the last year or so with the leadership of our public health department is racial equity training. And so everybody that's at the executive level in county government, all of our department heads have gone through that training. The same holds true for the city government. And we've had the good fortune of having our courts engage with us in this process, our judges, our public defender's office and all of the assistant DAs. And what that has done for us as a community, it's given us an opportunity to get some rather difficult issues on the table and to talk about those issues in some rather unconventional ways. They are all crucial conversations. And that racial equity training has been I think, quite beneficial as a foundation for us to get to some of these other issues. Now, as I talk about this multifaceted approach, while the MBK initiatives and the 6 things that I highlighted earlier in terms of what the president's challenge was, this multifaceted approach around the work that we are doing with MBK means that we've developed some rather critical partnerships all throughout our community to do this work, because it's not basically the responsibility, or neither does this MBK function have the ability to do the kind of outreach and service that will be necessary in order to make the changes around education, around court involvement, around workforce development and health disparities. And so one of the first things I want to talk about is essentially the Cities United Initiative, and I'll ask Dionne to sort of jump in here and share with us how we've engaged in this space in concert with the racial equity training that we've done, and then we'll talk about a few other initiatives.
So in September of this year, Cities United and the National League of Cities, a couple of people from those organizations came to Durham to talk to our city and county department directors about how to incorporate a racial equity lens into the work that we do regarding drafting, editing, and implementing policies, practices, and procedures. And we plan to continue these discussions as well as the racial equity trainings for our employees. Also, we entered into a partnership with Public Allies earlier this year. Public Allies has a national mandate to partner with their local MBK communities, and so that's what we've done, and we're working with 6 public allies, and they're helping us to implement components of our MBK action plan, as well as further refining components of the strategies within it.
What is the vision of MBK here in Durham?
So the long-term vision is to make sure that we have a comprehensive strategy in place that address all of the challenges that many of the boys that we are talking about serving, the boys and men of color, can have sort of a portal, if you will, to address many of the challenges that they are confronted with. But let me go back, because Dionne talked about Public Allies, and we had the good fortune of having yourself, along with the Board of Commissioners, to fund that Public Allies initiative, who's essentially been responsible for over the last several months, moving forward with the implementation strategies around our policy recommendation that was done. And there were 24 recommendations, as I said. But when I talk about this multifaceted approach, before I get to your next question, Chairman Page, I want to talk about all of the other critical partnerships that we do in fact have in our community. For example, the Duke Children's Data Center, which was launched back in 2015. This is currently housed in the School of Public Policy over at Duke, and the data center basically has access to databases for Durham Public Schools, for our Department of Social Services, and of course the Partnership for Children here in Durham. And this data center is currently working on developing this MOU that will allow them to collect the juvenile court records information. We had the good fortune a couple of months back to sit with the Durham School Board, and we received that presentation from the schools about their new code of student conduct and policy as a part of the restorative justice that is in fact going on inside schools. And so that's a critical piece of the work that we have to get done over in the education space, and I applaud the schools for taking the lead in this space, because when you look at the fact that 80% of the children that are in our public education system are in fact children of color, obviously boys and children of color, boys of color will benefit greatly from this restorative justice type practice. Then, of course, in the workforce development space, we've been spending a fair amount of time with our friends over at Made in Durham, who is doing critical work around developing significant education to career pathways for these young people, with a particular focus on making sure that once they are in fact out of school and graduated, that there is an opportunity, hopefully by age 25, for gainful employment, and connecting these young people with the appropriate employers to get them on their way and hopefully to a middle class lifestyle. I talked specifically about the Universal Pre-K program. The Board of County Commissioners, the school board, the Durham City Council all adopted essentially a joint resolution around development of a universal pre-K program for Durham. And work is going on in that space right now that will be extremely important around, again, how we service this population and making sure that we can bring young people along. And so those are just, sort of a few of the critical partnerships that we have going on. Tonight at our Board of County Commissioners meeting, one of the things that we will consider is a relationship with our Student U. Student U is essentially an after-school program that we operate out of the old W.G. Pearson program. And Student U has been extremely successful over a 10-year cohort of students. They have about 500 students that was in the after-school program that they've been serving over the years. And to date, I think the last statistic that I recall was about 92% of those children in that cohort are in fact going on to college. That's quite successful and what we should be interested in as a community, particularly around serving the population of young boys of color, is how we can expand that footprint and hence create greater opportunities for these young people to do well in school, so that at the end there is an opportunity for them to participate in enterprise and a holistic economic system that will up their socioeconomic levels. In the court space, it's also important to realize that, again, your leadership and Mayor Bell's leadership, along with a number of other folks in our courts, our law enforcement space, the city manager, Gudrun Palmer, that we were able to work towards the development and implementation of the misdemeanor diversion program. And I think that in and of itself, when you look at, obviously who's mostly in our jail, which is oftentimes boys of color and men of color. When I talk about over-incarceration, this offers us an opportunity, quite frankly, to create a out, if you will, that will give young folks an opportunity to go somewhere else other than jail, and subsequently give them a second chance when they are engaged in misdemeanors that oftentimes can be life-changing, depending upon what happens in respect to that particular court record. The last thing I want to talk about is essentially our Cure Violence Initiative, and this is something that was funded in this year's budget. And the Cure Violence Initiative is essentially a national model that's evidence-based, that have been implemented in a number of different communities across the globe. And subsequently, the whole notion is, as we think about violence and gun violence in our communities, we have the opportunity to have violence interrupters on the ground in many of these communities, working specifically with these communities for the express purposes of trying to make sure that we quell a lot of the violent acts in those respective communities. We're just now getting up and going, but it's important, particularly as it relates to the work that we have to do in this space. And so I know I've talked a lot, but what I'm trying to point out is that this MBK work, it's very comprehensive in nature. And it's also extremely important that we do this work through critical collaboration and partnerships in a way that affords us the opportunity to hopefully have the best return that we can have, and give young people a fighting chance, because that old adage that they are our future, it's very real. And I think that it's critically important that we make these social investments today in order to make sure that they have a good future.
How can Durham support MBK Durham in its current stage? If you would share that with us.
So one thing that a couple of the public allies are working on right now is a tool that we can use to collect information data, particularly about how organizations are measuring what they do, those organizations that work with boys and young men of color. And so one thing that people can do to support is to allow us to collect that data from their organizations, how they're measuring their work. Another point that I'll add here is that one of the things that we've learned as we've talked to the White House staff and some other people involved with MBK is that we're going to have to move the work of MBK Durham outside of local government. That will allow us to have more funding opportunities from different corporations. So that's another thing that we're going to be doing.
What is the main takeaway you want the audience to recall from today?
So the main takeaway for today, I would say, Chairman Page, is one, human capital is extremely important in terms of making those investments going forward, particularly as it relates to our future competitive advantage as a region and as a state. And so we've got to make those investments in young people.
Well, we'd definitely like to thank you both for joining us today, and we really appreciate all the hard work that you do on behalf of the community, and particularly for our young boys of color. And so thank you so much, and you're welcome back anytime.
Thank you.
We've had another good show, Chairman Page.
Absolutely, it was great to highlight this great program, and as we end the year, I'd like to wish everyone a joyous Happy New Year.
And I'd just like to thank you so much for all the time that you've spent serving as my co-host for In Touch with Durham County. We've had, I think, 3 different locations. We have done all kinds of topics, from cooking shows to information about what's going out in our streams, what's happening with our human services, what's happening in public health, the changes that are going on organizationally for Durham County government. But you've been right here. You've suggested some wonderful shows, and I just thank you from the bottom of my heart for the honor of working with you. You bring joy and you bring passion, and I don't know how we're going to replace you, but thank you so much, and best wishes to you.
Thank you, Deborah. It's been a pleasure to serve with you as well, and I think we've informed the community of a number of issues that affect county government. And thank you, County Manager Davis, for your leadership, and Dionne, for what you continue to do with county government. So we look forward to great work coming from county government.
Absolutely. And best wishes and happy holidays to everyone in Durham County.